If you grew up and lived in Waterbury, Holy Land always had a presence.
This massive 17 acres of land on top of a mountain where 225,000 cars pass every day on the main highway. It was always an intrigue for me. It was really an icon.
I remember when I was in college in Boston, you know, people would say, "Where are you from?" I'd say, "Waterbury, Connecticut." "Oh, that's that place with that big cross." I was in Ireland, and people would say, "Where are you from?" "Waterbury, Connecticut." And they'd say, "Oh, the holy city with the cross on the mountain." I thought that was really amazing, right?
It was said even back in the 1970s, as truckers drove through Waterbury on this main interstate, Route 84, that they would say a prayer. So it was really, everybody knew where the cross is. 56 feet tall. Everybody knows where this landmark is in Waterbury. So back in the 1960s, 70s, and really up to the mid-80s, when it was first built by a philanthropist, an attorney by the name of John Greco, when that was first built, it was a little mini replica of the Holy Land from Israel. And it culminated with the crucifix on the top.
So this was something that was done over the course of almost 2 decades. They started building it in 1957. And it was completed in 1974. So even though people were coming to visit during the 1960s and 1970s, they were visiting before it was even done.
And people came from really quite a distance. They had 40 to 45,000 people a year would go to Holy Land in Waterbury.
Well, the history of Holy Land began with John Greco, who was an attorney in the city of Waterbury many, many, many years ago. And he devoted quite a bit of his life to the construction of Holy Land.
Early in his life, John Greco studied to join the priesthood, but wound up becoming an attorney instead. But that calling for his faith was something that remained an important part of his life. The miniature houses and quite a lot of the other structures at Holy Land were made out of wire, so basically chicken wire that then was coated in plaster. So it was a really efficient way to build everything. He did everything by hand, did everything out of his own budget. There were donations to help, but it really was something that is a true folk art.
A lot of the materials that you look over there, they're hot water heaters, they're garage doors, they could be old milk cartons, and the circular long, like 6-foot buildings were actually hot water heaters. Windows were carved out of them, and they were placed up there to resemble buildings there.
It's positioned in an incredible place. I mean, we have 2 major highways, Route 8 north to south and Route 84 east and west, and nestled between the two in this Naugatuck Valley, from the lowest point to not the highest point, but one of the highest points, is the cross. And so many thousands of people see this every single day.
As a kid, as a 10-year-old, let's say, I was aware of Holy Land. It would have been in place for probably about 5 years. certainly aware of the cross lit up on the hill, and had gone there to visit and thought that the replicas, the little town, the places from the Bible that Greco built were cool. You know, as a 10-year-old, I thought it was really cool. It was the only city in the world where kids grew up thinking Christ had been electrocuted on the cross. And then probably in later years, as a teenager and into my 20s, I didn't think it was cool anymore. I thought it was sort of embarrassing in some way that I can't quite put my finger on. But then, as I got even older, I began to appreciate Holy Land for what it was, you know, as a strange piece of outsider art, you could call it, but also one that was built with real passion. You know, you could picture John Greco on that hillside, working in what he would have thought of as at the bidding of the Lord, putting this together for others to see and enjoy.
So imagine his vision was on this 17 acres to have this be a place of destination where people can come like almost on a little mini pilgrimage. Pilgrimage is a great part of Christian tradition, that people would travel miles for spiritual destinations to pray. And I imagine that that was his vision as well. And he did magnificently for those 3 decades. And in the midst of this very busy city, and you can hear all the traffic going by on Route 84, there is a sense of serenity and peace, kind of reflective of our own busy lives. Our lives can be in turmoil. When a person has a relationship with God, there's actually an inner peacefulness. So the ruins are there, but there's peace in the ruins. There's a serenity on this beautiful mountain.
When John Greco died, he left it to the Sisters of Filippini.
The Filippini Sisters is a religious community within the Catholic Church, as far as I know, based in Italy. And there was a number of them here in the Archdiocese of Hartford. There were between 4 and 6 of them living at the convent on Holy Land.
Johnny Greco spent his whole life, and he wound up living in a small apartment, a little room in the back of the Peace Hall over there. And the nuns that came in were the Filippini nuns, and they took over the house. And they were like his caregivers. So he eventually turned everything over to the nuns, and the nuns just let it fall apart there.
The Filippini sisters took over during the 1980s and did what they could to maintain it even while it was no longer open to the public, but it became very difficult at that stage. Once it was no longer open to the public, once it really became semi-abandoned, I mean the nuns were still there, but it really was not being regularly maintained. The weeds, the trees, everything became massively overgrown to the point where you almost couldn't even see the Holy Land sign anymore. And so it became something where it was very easy to trespass and just wander around.
I went through a period of time where the nuns just stopped allowing anyone on the property, period. The sisters or the nuns would call the police from time to time as they were concerned about trespassing and things like that.
People loved to go to the catacombs because it was spooky, and so there were a lot of issues with vandalism, with littering, all of those sorts of things. So that contributed to the decay of Holy Land. The catacombs were removed, I believe in the 1990s. They had reached a point of disintegration.
When they sold, the highway came in and they took the catacombs and a bunch of the land over there. They gave them $500,000. They took the money and they sent it over to their order in the Philippines, as opposed to investing it into Holy Land.
There was not any regular maintenance that was done. A lot of it really, was constructed out of plaster, so it wore out pretty quickly.
They just weren't very cooperative. They wouldn't let us use the basement of the chapel to store stuff. And then one time after we were cleaning, the holidays were coming up and we went to go see the sisters and we said, listen, we'd like to invite the people up for Thanksgiving or Christmas and show them the progress that we've made. And I'll never forget, she turned to us and said, what do you think, this is Disneyland? I talked to almost everybody up in Hartford, the Archdiocese of Hartford. I talked to every priest in the area. We're trying to get some support or the Catholic Church to come in and help us out. But they said as long as the nuns are in charge, there's nothing we can do about it. So
Holy Land went into decline, and it became, again, sort of an embarrassment, sort of something you didn't point to, certainly. And it kind of reflected the decline in the city as a whole.
We were the brass and copper capital of the world. You know, we provided the buttons for the Civil War. World War I, World War II, buckles, bullets, shells. This was a major manufacturing city, and it would, to be quite honest, you could, by looking at the architecture here in Waterbury, this land was blessed. You know, it was just a very busy, like I said earlier, if you wanted a job, just come to Waterbury, Connecticut. Now, what's happened? Well, the advent of plastics, vinyl, other products, it's quicker, it's cheaper, and so brass and copper didn't have the same need as it once did.
I was born in 1950, so it was a still robust industrial city, factory whistles, smoke billowing from smokestacks, trains running in and out of the depot. Scoville's and Anaconda and Chase Brass were still going strong in the 1950s. My father, John S. Monaghan, was the mayor of Waterbury during World War II. He was bachelor mayor from 1943 to 1948. He was the mayor. Being the mayor of a major industrial city during a world war was a big job because the war effort depended very much on the output of places like Waterbury and the spirit of a place like Waterbury also.
We, as a society, were a very religious. Waterbury was an extremely religious town. Just look at the churches and look at the cathedral that we have on the green. And what's happened now, matter of fact, I was reading the article in the newspaper, and it simply said that you could take all of the churches for the 4:15 Mass or the Saturday afternoon Mass and put them in the Basilica, which is the Immaculate Conception, which is located on the green in Waterbury. And years ago, every church on Sunday, the church was packed.
At one point they called it the City of Priests. It was known as the City of Priests. It was a place that produced more than its share of priests for the Catholic Church. And there was every kind of church, but most remarkable to me was the Catholic Church because I was being raised a Catholic. You know, at that time, all the churches were doing well. The Catholic Church was flourishing, and it's just remarkable to me the change that has occurred over the last 20 or 30 years that finds, I don't know, a third the number of churchgoers, that even less maybe than there once were. It's just church going in general and feeling an association with the church group that has just disappeared in a lot of respects. take the case of my mother, a lifelong Catholic, who as she got into her 80s just really became fed up with the way that the Catholic Church has treated women over the centuries and decades, and treating them totally as second-class citizens. I don't think that's a way to make yourself grow in this day and age. But also, being a strong religious person requires a discipline, a faith. I think people are less inclined to have that discipline and that sort of faith now. There's kind of been a softening of those characteristics, rightly or wrongly, and I think that's made it very hard for religious communities to thrive.
Well, the parish that I'm pastor of, called the Basilica of the Immaculate Conception, is the oldest church in Waterbury. In fact, this year is our 175th year. Because we're an inner city church right on the Waterbury Green, we're the mother church, and so we're a melting pot. This church really reflects a Catholicity. That word from Greek, katholos, which simply means universal, everywhere, all-encompassing. We really do possess that here at the Basilica. I have a feeling that great grace is going to come somehow, that someone or some small group of people is going to say, you know what? It's time for a revival. It's time to move away from the same old in the spiritual life, which has diminished in decades, and to turn upward and to have a movement back to God.
Maybe it was 8, 10 years ago, Fritz Blasey, who owns Loman Chevrolet, and the mayor of the city of Waterbury, Neil O'Leary, went to the nuns and wanted to purchase the property.
The elderly people would constantly ask me if I could do anything to revitalize Holy Land. I was really astounded by that, I mean, it was that important to all of them. My friend got back to me and said, Neil, the problem is it's really impossible for whatever reason for anyone to reach the Sisters of Filippini. There's a guy here in Waterbury named Fritz Blasey. He owns Blasey Chevrolet. But he's very involved with the Archdiocese of Hartford then and even now. We all drove up to Hartford and we met with the Archbishop, and we told him that we were interested in the property. And he said, what do you want to do with it? And we said, we just want to restore it. We want to bring it back. And he said, well, the nuns are all in New Jersey. They're in Morristown, New Jersey. He said, I don't know how many are even still alive because they were all in their mid and late 80s and 90s. But he said, let me see what I can do. We had a meeting set up with the provincial nun, and I said, we really just want to make it a place where people can go like we did when we were kids. And she said, we'll talk about the price in a minute, but there's one thing that you need to know. We won't sell it to anybody unless it remains forever and ever Holy Land. Fritz and I didn't have a problem with that because that was the whole reason why we were doing this. So it fit in pretty well with our plan. She was delighted at that. She was very nice and she was very friendly. And she said the price is $375,000. That's what it's going to be. So, we're not going to go lower. And that's the price. So she looked at me and, I'm not the guy with money, by the way, Paul. I was I'm the kind of the middle class guy. And I looked at Fritz and I said, what do you think? And he said, I think that's perfect. And when can we close? And that began the adventure of Holy Land.
Neil and Fritz Blasey bought the land, and things have been great since then. I never thought I'd see it in my lifetime, but they paid an outfit $80,000 to come in and pave the road that goes around Holy Land, and they've been very cooperative in letting us rebuild it, and it's all really from volunteers and stuff there.
So I believe that, yes, something beautiful is going to happen there. I don't know what that is. I have my own ideas. But I have a feeling as a society, we can only move so far away from God before we begin to realize, I really need this in my life. I have great hope for the future. And I believe the good Lord has future plans for it. I do too. But I think something magnificent is meant to happen there. Something beautiful is planned for this mountain. God speaks on mountains, by the way. You don't have to read too far into the Bible before you see Mount Ararat, the first mountain mentioned in the Bible. Mount Nebo, Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai, Mount of the Beatitudes, Mount Calvary. The list goes on of mountains. And God speaks on mountains. And I have a feeling, although 2,000 years ago, that God's going to speak on another mountain. And it's going to be right here in Waterbury. And that great grace is going to come over the city and beyond as a result of the prayers that's going to flow from the top of that mountain, where I believe God will speak.